Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write great fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, having a lot of trouble with Google tonight, so please bear with me as I take extra steps here to try and get our other hosts involved. For whatever reason, when I invite them, they are not receiving their invitation, so we're trying a few different things here to see if we can get them invited in. In the meantime, you can look at my wonderful face, which I'm not sure if that's a punishment or an advantage. But yeah, so that's what's happening. I'm not sure why it's not inviting our co-hosts in. Looks like Quotidian Light says that Google's been acting up on her phone as well, so maybe it's a Google thing. Maybe we won't be able to podcast tonight, and that would make me really sad. But let's keep at it here a little bit. I'll tell you, if we can't get this live, maybe what we will do is at least try and record something later in this week, and at least get you an audio cast for you to download at your convenience. Right now, if anybody is on and listening, that's super good with Google. Maybe you can let me know why my invites are not getting through. I did try and send the email link, the actual link to the broadcast here to see if they could click on that and join, but I'm not sure that's working either. Don't you love technology? Boy, I sure don't. So let me try this again here. I wonder if there's something in my settings. No, that doesn't give me anything. Sad days. So this is what I'm going to do. I've been having to, okay, so Quotidian Light says, I've been having to email the links to my co-hosts, and that usually works fine. Okay, well, I've sent the link to my father, so that's good. Hopefully he's got that. I'll check my oh, what is this? It hasn't sent it. Okay, so now it's sending the email. Hooray, hooray. So that should be sent off. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed, and we are going to trust that this email link is going to get our co-hosts in. I'm going to make you all sick by moving my computer around. And I will tell you guys a little bit of story, a little story here, a little shameless self-promotion while this is going on. I do have a short story up called Drive. I'm going to go ahead and put a link here on my lower third here. Turn that on for you guys, and hopefully that'll come on. Let's see here. Is that coming up? So nothing wants to work tonight. Okay, so here's what you do. Go to aarongansky.com, and the most recent post is called Short Story Drive, and it's got a link there to the Aperion Review. It's a Philadelphia-based literary magazine, and they have published my short story called Drive. It's fantastic. It's a little piece of flash fiction. It's a couple of pages long, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And you know, some big shout outs to Molly Jo Reilly for helping me out with that and getting that going. She kind of sent that out on my behalf and found a home for it. So I'm pretty excited, and I'd love for you guys to read it. Maybe Molly will say something specific on the comments about that particular story. Let's see. Please get it connected before Angie turns into a pumpkin, Bruce Brady says. That's great. So you need to offer Google Plus more milk and cookies. That's apparently what I haven't done yet. So let me double check my email, see if my father has gotten that yet.
Can you hear me?
Oh! Do we have an Alton Gansky? How are you? I can hear you, except now I think you may have muted yourself.
There we go. Well,
there
people have been trying to mute me. All right, let me bring you up to speed here. I got your I got your link. I clicked on that. That opened another window, oddly enough, in Safari rather than Google. But nonetheless, here I am. So the question is, did Angie get a link? The link would have come, Angie, through your email. So if you check your email, there should be a how you say in English, an email from Aaron. And there'll be a link on it, and it should open another window. And
we are discombobulated tonight.
Yeah, I've not seen this before.
It's bizarre, but if we're going to have to do it this way in advance, at least we know. So Lori Stanley Roeleveld, a fantastic writer with her own book out. We need to have Lori on the show, but she's one of those East Coasters. She's probably snowed in. That's why she's up late. Probably doesn't have to go into work tomorrow, but she's a fantastic writer. We need to get her on the show. She's provided the link on the page there with the link to my story if you guys are interested. And Molly here is letting us know that it's 748 words. It's great flash fiction, she says. Good story, well-developed characters, very emotional. So hashtag shameless self-promotion. And while we're waiting for Angie to join us, Pops, do we want to go ahead and jump ahead or at least get started on the publishing term for the week? Do we have one of those?
Yeah, but I probably forgot it by now.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I'm Alton Gansky. I'm from Central California, and I have the privilege of joining this podcast each week. And I'm the author of about 40 books, both fiction and nonfiction. Yeah, let me give you a term here, and it's page proofs. Now, so far we've talked about over the transom, the bar over a door inside the old buildings where you would throw your manuscript through a little window over the door that they use for ventilation. That's called over the transom. We talked about leading, space between lines, when they used to actually put strips of lead, and then we talked about kerning, the space between letters. The word for today is page proof. Now, the only reason I bring it up is there's a little confusion. Some people still call them galleys. I have a tendency to call them galleys. Technically, they're not anymore. Galleys are long strips of paper that the printer would put out. That's what you would check before they would get it all cut down and ready for print. But the term is still used. Most publishers will use it as a reference to the typeset manuscript. So you turn your manuscript in with, it's double spaced and 1-inch margins and that sort of thing. Well, it's got to be converted to a page size that they're going to print. So if it's trade paper, it's one size. If it's hardbound, it's another size. And so all of that has to be set up, and it's all done by computer now, but the old days it was done by hand and then a little later by a type of machine, a linotype machine. Well, you used to have to print these things out to catch mistakes in them. Now they use what's called page proofs, and they usually come to you as a PDF file, or sometimes they'll send them to you as a physical thing to check. The older the publisher, the older the way they do it. I actually had to do one physical, and I had to use a special colored pencil so it wouldn't conflict with the other 3 editors' pencils. So you never quite know what you're going to get. But most of it now is done through Word and track changes. But it'll vary from publisher to publisher. So page proofs, that's the word for the day.
Excellent. I think we're close to getting to page proofs on Hand of Ad and I. We've done first round of editing, just did the second round of editing and sent that back off to Brimstone. So I'm looking forward. I'm hoping that we'll get to some page proofs soon. I found those to be, especially in the digital market now, a little interesting because sometimes there were no errors, but in the formatting to get everything to fit on the page, there are sometimes extra errors. Paragraph returns, carriage returns, whatever you want to call them, sometimes get left out, and just some small typos appear here and there. So it's kind of a tedious process, but I've always enjoyed getting them because it means I'm that much closer to getting the book on the shelves, and that's always an exciting thing. So
it is yeah, I know it's a process and it is tedious, and a lot of people don't realize this, that in publishing, if you write a 100,000 word book, you get that's a lot, 100,000 words, and the average word length is 5 in the English language, 5 letters. So now you've got 500,000 letters, not counting spaces and punctuation. So you throw some of those in, and you've got 600, 700,000 things that can go wrong if you're off one digit, one bit of punctuation. So it is amazing that things get through as cleanly as they do. Now, mistakes get through, as you're talking about. My new book, 30 Events That Shaped the Church, Charles Darwin got a mistake. It's a transposition. I wrote that it was 21 years between the two books that he published. It wasn't. It was 12. So 1-2 became 2-1. And so we'll have to catch that on another edition. But those little things kind of get through no matter how hard you try. That it happens.
And multiple sets of eyes can miss them a lot. And so just going back through and seeing our other editor, our copy editor, take a look at it, there were a couple of mistakes where, really? How did we miss that? We were pretty thorough, I thought. Bethany Kazmarek and myself, she did an excellent job. More praise to her than to me, but there was, I think, a couple things where like, oh, really? Yeah, how did we let that one slide past us? But it happens.
Well, we got to do a whole show on the typos that I've made. He has eternal injuries instead of internal injuries. And
that's my favorite. Yeah.
The movie was Eating Rice from a Rough Wooden Bowel. There's no E in bowl.
Yeah.
I've just got a whole list of those things, and that's why we need as many editors as possible to go over, especially copy editors. They're magical. Well, Aaron, any word? I can't see much of the dialogue, unfortunately, going on. Any word from Angie?
I don't see anything from Angie. Let me put something on the page and see if she can see it. I'll tag her here.
Okay.
Did you get the email? And in the meantime, question mark here from Al. In the meantime, I'll tell you a quick story before we get started. If you're noticing, I'm not quite as dapper today as in podcasts of the past. I'm wearing my little hoodie and a little kind of wrinkly old shirt here. It's because I can't move my arm, my left arm. So ended up somehow contracting rotator cuff tendonitis, which is ridiculously painful. So I've kind of had to adapt my setup here and kind of put on whatever I get on without excruciating pain. But I'm going through some treatment process and stuff like that. But it's the same thing Kobe Bryant has, so that means I'm like a professional athlete. So definitely,
yeah.
We got it the same way. We got it the same way. Me and Kobe Bryant, same injury, rotator cuff tendonitis. Got it the same way, fixing our garbage disposal. I don't know that's how he did it, but I'm going to go ahead and say that's how he did it. So it makes me feel better about myself. But so yeah, a lot of pain. I'm medicated. Maybe that's important to know for tonight in case I seem a little bit loopy.
Well, I was going to say that probably explains the problem then.
Yeah, right. And Google. Yeah, that's why it wasn't Google. It was just me taking way too much ibuprofen. So.
Well, I'm glad we have a patient viewership. The email you sent to Angie, you said, did she get the invite from me or from you?
It should have come from you because I don't have an email. I don't have her email address.
Well, I don't have a link to send her.
The email that I sent you.
Okay, stand by.
With the link. Yeah, so if you could forward that on to her. This is what we call First in Fiction behind the scenes, a behind the scenes look at all the tech problems that we have. We say 6:30, and I like that our viewership is gracious enough to wait around till 6:35, 6:40, or 6:56, as the case may be, Pacific time.
Okay, Angie, hopefully you're still watching.
Yeah.
I've just sent you an email. You will find a link at the bottom of the email. If you click on that, it should open a window, and then you will get to join us. And Aaron will apologize profusely. It's not really his fault, but someone's got to do it.
Hey, I started this podcast. It's my fault. Everything's my fault. So I'm used to being the scapegoat. It's a role I'm comfortable in. I accept my responsibility. But yeah, I guess we can get started a little bit with our topic. Identifying audience, which is actually a topic that one of our former hosts, Steve McLean, pitched to me some years ago, or I guess a year ago or so, and I've pushed it off. I pushed it off and pushed it off because I didn't know how much I had to say on the matter, but after giving it some thought, and I'm sure you have a lot of great insight, and so does Angie, because she's published in a lot of different, I guess, genres, as have you, and it feels like, you know, with each genre we have a different audience. So real quick, Pops, if you don't mind, what do we mean when we talk about audience?
Well, just like a movie or a theater production has an audience, people go to see it. The same can be said for readers. They pick up a book and they want to be entertained or they want to be educated. And so they become your audience. So when you're writing a nonfiction book, your audience is going to be different than when you're writing a novel. And when you're writing a novel, your audience is going to be different if you're writing romance than if you're writing supernatural suspense or horror. And if you're writing science fiction, that's a different group. And even though the tendency in publishing is to call science fiction and fantasy the same thing, they like to put them together. They're really not. So those who love fantasy, that's a different audience than science fiction. And so when we think about audience, one of the first things an author has to do when they decide they're going to write a novel is, will there be an audience for it? That is, if they're writing to be published, not just writing for themselves. Is there a way to understand that audience and write for them? And one of the things I've seen since I've done a lot of teaching and stuff is occasionally I will come across a writer whose real audience is themselves. That's really what they want to do, is they want to please themselves. They want to be called an author. And that, I think, is really the kiss of death. They lose art. They lose really the drive. So I'm sorry, pausing because all these things are going off around me here. So you need to know your audience when you're going to write and keep them in mind, and that's what we're wanting to talk about tonight: how to do that, and who your audience might be.
It's also important to remember that if you don't have an audience in mind, publishers are a lot less likely to look at your manuscript. They want to know the exact audience, and the temptation is for us to simply say, my book is for everybody. Everybody's going to love my book. And you know what? That may be true in the sense that people may pick it up and really read it and enjoy it, but not everybody's going to pick it up. I teach this principle to my AP students, and we'll read a selection, an article, and I'll say, who's the intended audience for this? And they go, high school juniors taking advanced placement English. Like, no, they didn't write this for you. Not everything in the world was written for you. So what I ask them is this: who's going to read this article on purpose? Who's going to read it and like it? Who wants to read this? And so asking it in that way makes them think about, okay, what do we know about this piece? What is this piece talking about? And what can we learn from it that people want to see? For example, I let them read a great article by David Brooks called "Fly the Partisan Skies." That was published years ago, and it is fantastic. It was right before George W. Bush's second re-election, so during that presidential campaign. And but it's the satirical piece where he proposes these two airlines be founded, Liberal Air and Right Wing Express, and he just hyperbolizes their political ideals into absurd kind of airline policies, and it's very, very humorous. But of course, it's kind of lost on my high school audience since they don't remember George W. Bush being in office anymore, which makes me feel really old. The idea is that he's not going to write this for people who've never studied politics, who don't follow politics. He's writing it for a politically aware audience. He's writing it for probably partisans who are deeply entrenched in their political values. These are the people who are going to read this, and these are the people he wants to read it in order to encourage them perhaps to change some of their ideas. Now, it looks like we've got Angie Hunt joining us.
Yeah, I just reset the thing. So here
Okay.
she.
I am, but I've got voices.
The idea is that. Oh,
Okay,
you know what? Yeah, you've got the thing still playing. So if you were watching us live, go ahead and you can probably close the page.
I think I've closed everything down now, except for
sounds right.
Obviously you.
Okay. Hooray.
Oh my goodness, such work to get to you guys. I had to plug in thing, and it said download 7 minutes, and then my mouse batteries died, and it was sort of like Murphy's Law run amok. But hi,
yeah,
how are you?
Angie,
That's
we're normally more
fiction.
organized than this, and it goes off pretty much without a hitch. But today, it's ironic. I was on someone else's podcast about podcasting, and I was really looking forward to it. I thought, good, I'm going to show these professional podcasters how this is done. And then one of my lights went out, and somebody started banging on the door and ringing the doorbell because they kicked the ball in my backyard, and they wouldn't give it up. And this is a lot. Oh man! So anything that can go wrong, sooner or later will. Thanks for
absolutely
bearing with us. So if you will let me kind of deviate from you there a little bit, Aaron, let me introduce Angie Hunt. Angie's a pal. She is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to try and embarrass her and see if that comes across on the image here. It's Dr. Angela Hunt, now has a PhD, but she has written over 100 books, and one reason we thought it would be great to have her on is she has this wide spectrum of publication. Some of them are suspense novels. There's been some history stuff. Her latest book, which we'll want you to tell us a little bit about, her latest book is a biblical historical story. Great cover on the book, and getting some great reviews. So that's exciting. So she knows what audience is, the difference between writing a children's book for a children's audience and then writing for biblical people who read biblical history, and then writing suspense like The Island that you wrote?
Oh, Uncharted.
Uncharted, that's what it was. Uncharted.
Mm-hmm.
And the like. So in addition to all of those things, she is a photographer and a singer and a world-class chef. I made up the last part. I don't know if that's true or not. But...
Baker. I bake. I don't cook.
Oh. All right. Well, thanks for being here with Aaron and I. Sorry for the mess up.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always fun to hang out with y'all.
All righty, back to you, Aaron. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad you introduced her, and Angie, thanks for being on. Lends a lot of credibility to our operation here. But as I was saying, the audience is somebody who's going to read this on purpose. So you want to ask yourself, who am I writing this for? Who's going to pick this up on purpose? And I think there are a few things that you can consider to help identify that. But Lori Rolleveld brings up a good point. She says on her blog she created a profile of her target reader and one for her secondary reader. So she's thinking about her primary readership and perhaps a secondary readership. And she says it was at that moment that her writing really took off, really started to grow. She writes for her fictional reader Karen and her pastor Don, and I think that's kind of an interesting idea to come up with this idea of a fictional reader that fits the demographic of whom you're really trying to reach and who it is that's going to want to read this book. But being the baby writer here, I've got far less books to my name as the two of you. So what process, if I can ask, what process do you guys go through? We'll start with you, Angie. When you're writing a book, what kind of considerations do you make when you're thinking about audience and how that's going to affect how you write?
I'm just tickled because you stopped talking and your mouth kept moving for a minute. Well, I think you just have to remember that this is really, it's something you are doing for someone else. And I think Al mentioned a minute ago, I heard him say something about he's met writers who it's clear after reading their stuff that they're just really writing it for themselves. And that is very clear because it's not a me-centered occupation. It's all about the reader. And so if I'm writing nonfiction, it's like, what materials have I gathered together that's going to help my reader with this topic? If I'm writing a historical novel, it's what are the things that historical readers love and how can I give it to them in this story? When I'm writing for children, it's what is it that kids think is fun? I read so many manuscripts for kids that are didactic and preachy, especially in the Christian market, and I think, that's not fun at all. I wouldn't want to read that if I was a kid. I think I still am a little bit of a kid. And fun, it's got to be fun, first of all, and that's really important. So it's, I do write books that I would like to read myself, and so the things I don't really enjoy reading, I don't enjoy writing. Hi, baby. My dog came up to join us. And so I do write the sorts of things that I would like to read, but then again, reading has to be an exercise that's basically other-centered. Not everybody is going to find my books their cup of tea, and that's okay. In fact, the foolproof way to find who's not your reader is to read a bad review, and I always console myself with just saying, well, obviously that person is not my ideal reader, so I will write for the people who are.
You make a really good point there about the bad reviews. I go back to I think of the short story I wrote called "An Affair to Forget," and the cover art seems fairly suggestive. And I've got a 1-star review on there. Everybody else gave me 5 stars, and I got this 1-star review, and she clearly wanted a romance. Like, that's what she was looking for. You look at the title, you look at the cover, you think, I'm getting a romance. She thinks she's getting a romance. She did not get a romance. She was not my target audience by any stretch of the imagination. Resulted in a 1-star review, which, in her defense, you know, it seemed to the cover seemed to be selling to a different target audience. And that was, you know, not what we had intended, but that's kind of what happened. You know, and I think that's something else that you need to consider, that publishers even consider when they're doing cover art. What cover art is? How is the cover going to appeal to the audience? How is the cover going to attract the eyes of our ideal readers? How can we visually state something in such a way that the audience is going to take notice? The target audience is going to notice, this is a book I want to read. Let me read the back cover, find out what it's about. So I think there's a lot of considerations there as well. Pops, you've done fiction and nonfiction as well. So when you're approaching your stuff, you write for a different demographic normally than I'm assuming that Angie writes for. What kind of considerations do you make, and how does that affect your process of writing?
Well, on the fiction side, well, first let me say this. Your idea doesn't have to be governed by your audience, but your idea needs to target an audience. So if I'm going to write something, I don't write romance books. I wouldn't know how to write a romance book. I could probably do it. Probably wouldn't be all that good. So I just don't do that. And therefore, when I'm writing my, whether it's action, adventure, or supernatural suspense, and I did a series of military ones, I'm not thinking of the romance market. I'm thinking of different people. And so I get in my mind an individual. They don't really have any feature. They don't have any name. I don't do that. I just kind of get a sense of who that person is. So when I was writing with Major Jeffrey Strucker, doing his books for him, and writing, I was writing for the guys in his unit. That's who I saw, because he was going to use them for other purposes too. So I was writing for Tom Clancy's audience, and you know, and people who carry guns for a living. But when I write supernatural suspense, I have a little different audience in mind, and then it affects everything I do from that point on, from the way it's presented, the pacing. Can I keep the reader involved with these things, and even the cover? And with one Zondervan title, The Prodigy, the first cover they sent me. The Prodigy's a young boy, so they put a profile of a young boy on the cover, and I looked at it and I thought, well, this is a focus on the family book. There's nothing ominous about it. It doesn't even say it's a novel. It could be a child-rearing book. So I asked them to reconsider it, and then they did something rather ingenious. They had this, you see the cover, there's this hint of an evil man in the background, and superimposed over the boy's face, and it worked. It worked, but that's the only reason I could do that is I knew this cover would not target the audience I had written for, and so there was going to be that disconnect there for them. So I usually have someone in mind, and I do that with nonfiction too. I have particular people in mind when I'm writing. They don't really exist, but I imagine what they're like, and I never lose track of them. I try to stay focused on them and the things that are important to them.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up The Prodigy, which I thought was a fantastic book, by the way. And for me, The Prodigy breaks one of the, I don't even know if I want to call this a rule, but one of the, I guess, guidelines for identifying your audience, and that is to look at your protagonist And if your protagonist is, you know, a middle-aged man, married, etc., that's probably the gender and age range of your target audience. Generally, not always. But with The Prodigy, you're focusing predominantly on a child, but in that novel, it's not just the child, it's also the child's mother, and they kind of get involved with some unsavory characters. So there's still kind of that supernatural element that's going to attract kind of your Stephen King type readers, but it's one that targets an audience that doesn't match necessarily the protagonists of the novel. Did you find that to be more of a challenge at all, or in context of marketing?
Well, in that particular book, it was more of an ensemble piece. The focus, as Alfred Hitchcock would call it, the MacGuffin in this case. And a MacGuffin is an object that drives a story forward. So if you've ever seen the old movie The Maltese Falcon is the MacGuffin. It's a catalyst. It is not part of the action. It's the object of the action. In this case, it's a young boy. So he's not really the protagonist. We're going to identify him that way, I think, if you're reading it. But it's really him, his mother, and some others. So it's a bit of an ensemble. So I don't know that I was breaking rules, but it was a different kind of story. So it wasn't going to fit a template. So I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of the question there.
That's fine. I did too. I think my question was, did it affect the marketing of the book at all?
No, because the marketing of the book was that it was a suspense novel. I was doing all supernatural suspense there, so that's what my name would have conjured up for the reader anyway. So my readers would expect that kind of weird, off-the-wall, spooky stuff. You know, targeting your audience that way matters. There's a best-selling author. I get to interview him here in a few weeks, and we were talking a long time ago about my books, and he writes suspense, but he turned to me and says, "Now, do you write scary stuff?" And I said, "Well, yeah, there's some of it that's kind of scary with that." And he goes, I can't read it; it'll keep me up at night." And I've always remembered that. Angie would know who the person is. He's writing under a pseudonym now too, so he's writing under two names. But he didn't like that stuff. I keep him in mind too, that he is not my audience, and so I need people who like to be chilled a little bit in their fiction. Let me ask Angie a question. Angie, your most recent book is historical in nature. It goes way back to well, you could say Old Testament times. Certainly, that's where the story's in there, and you have a Jewish queen. Now, did you have in mind a particular audience for that book?
Not really, other than just people who like historical fiction. And, you know, I write contemporary fiction and historical fiction, and I find that really there's a definite preference. People who read historical don't always read contemporary, and a lot of people who read a lot of contemporary think that historical is boring. But I think it's fascinating. But then again, I love research, and I love putting in the little details, and as a writer, the trick is you don't give them block paragraphs of, you know, facts and dates and whatever. You just work it in as it unfolds, and I think it's fascinating. When I was a kid, in 5th and 6th grade, I was reading Gone with the Wind and Jane Eyre and all those old historical novels, and I just ate them up. So it's sort of natural, I guess, that's what I'd want to write.
And other than historical, Angie, what other genres have you written in?
I think you'd be surprised that Al and we overlap a lot, actually. I've written a lot of speculative and women's fiction, which is not romance, contemporary, some thrillers. I did a legal thriller, done some medical thriller stuff, a lot of historicals, both in biblical characters and just other, you know, American history, European history. The only thing I really don't do is military, although I did do some apocalyptic
Mm-hmm.
things with Grant Jeffrey. Grant, you worked with Grant too, didn't you, Al? The
I
late
did.
Grant Jeffrey.
Yeah. His passing was quite the surprise. Um, yes, yeah. We're
Yeah.
supposed to do some more stuff too. With that fascinating man.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well,
Really good guy. But yeah. So just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I write romance. In fact, to me, it's always been too simple for my taste. Guy meets girl, guy loses girl, guy gets girl in the end. So I like things a little more complicated.
I think you bring up a good point, though. You say that romance seems too simple for your tastes, and I don't want our listeners to hear that as a criticism of the genre so much, and I know that's not how you mean it.
No, it's
But
not.
because when we're considering audience, right, we have to consider the audience expectations, and we have to ask ourselves, and I don't know how intentionally you guys do this, but is there a list of perhaps subconscious questions, or maybe questions you've even written down, to the effect of what do my readers expect to see? How can I challenge my readers, my expected readers, my audience, and what are deal breakers for my audience? Do those things kind of pop into your mind when you're writing?
Well, I would like to backtrack for a minute about the romance thing because romance is a beautiful thing, and in fact, it is the most popular genre, period. Um, but I tend to like the stories that don't follow the expectations that are in genre romance. For instance, one of my favorite movies, favorite stories of all time that's romantic. It was in that movie. It starred Richard Gere and Jodie Foster, and he played her husband, and he came back from the Civil War. And it turns out he was a look-alike, but it wasn't really her husband. And she fell in love with this new guy because he found out that her husband had actually died, and so he kind of came back to take his place. And then in the end, he dies because he's hanged for something that the husband did. And so rather than tell the truth and come clean, he wanted to preserve his honor and die. And I loved that story. But the romance aficionados hated it because they didn't get together at the end. It didn't have a happy ending. So my taste is more for the melodrama, I'll admit it. But yeah, so it's those sorts of things. And I think if this story is not going to have the expected happy ending, then I can't write it as a romance. And I tend to have high body counts and a fair number of people dying in my stories because, novels are about emotion, and that's the best way to get to it.
Oh, she's brutal. She's just brutal at times.
Yeah, I think that's always a good way to get pages to be turned. Just drop a body someplace, and what I don't think anybody's been murdered in like 28 pages. I got to fix that. So.
I'm trying to remember who suggested. So James Scott Bell, somebody suggests that when things start slowing down, kill someone. Of course, you can't do that in every kind of book. So,
yeah. Pops, what about you? Any sort of subconscious questions that you keep in the back of your mind as you're working through your manuscripts?
No, but the way my mind works is things come to me as images or situations, and I know this could be hard to explain. Often I'll start a book and not know where it's going to go. I'll just know the basic idea. Sometimes the character appears, sometimes the situation appears. Then I start tracing it down. I don't like to let the audience dictate what my story is going to be or how I'm going to write it. But as I write, I always have this idea in mind of who's going to read it. So I'm sure those who love Westerns, for example, are probably not going to enjoy some of the stuff I've written. Let's say like Wounds, which is kind of a rugged, it's not quite a police procedural, which is a special kind of genre in crime, but it's rough, it's tense, there's a ton of emotion in it on both sides, lots of guilt and intrigue in it. Now, I don't think of, well, gee, my readers are going to love this twist. I don't do that. But I do know that there are people who like this. This is what they like in the crime kinds of stories, and when I was doing military, this is what they like in the military. Most people who read military like a little more detail. I didn't go as far as Tom Clancy. He'll tell you the number of rivets, on an F-22. I thought that was too far, so I had to kind of strike a balance. And the books are also designed so that women will enjoy them. We tell both sides, the military man and the family at home, with that. So I had to strike a balance. So that's what I had in mind in writing those. I had to appeal to military guys, but also had to appeal to military wives, or spouses who's ever home taking care of the kids. What do the kids go through, and so on. So that's what I mean by an audience. I keep those kinds of people in mind, but the story is going to dictate to me what I'm going to write.
I think if I can be a little ethereal here, I think our stories, especially discovery writers like myself, I think our stories know their own audience. And one thing that I do when I'm writing and considering audience is I think of what I expect to happen next. And if I expect it to happen next, then my readers are going to expect it to happen next, and it's too easy. So I have to ask myself the question, well, what else can possibly happen? So the books I like are books that do surprise me in some way. I just finished reading a book which I will not name, and it was one large cliche from the prologue to the last page, and I kept asking myself, why am I finishing this? I already know how it ends. And I knew from before the prologue even finished, I knew exactly how it ended, and it was just, there was no character depth or development, and everybody was just a bland, kind of an archetype, one-dimensional character. And I learned very quickly those are not the books for me. However, this book has sold millions and millions of copies because some people like what's expected. Thinking of the romance genre, right? I know he's going to get the girl in the end, and that makes me happy. We're going to have a happy ending. If I don't get that, you've broken some of my expectations, and now I don't like you as a writer. So I think a lot of times discovery writers discover the audience for the story as they go along. You may not have one specifically when you set out, but I think by the time you finish your project, you should have a good idea of what you're looking for. And perhaps if you go back and look at the process of creation, you might find the questions that you're asking yourself are in fact pointing to your particular readership that you might want to go for. For me, I like readers who enjoy being surprised. I like readers who don't like to be tricked, though. They like to be surprised but not tricked, not fooled, not taken advantage of. If I can say this, I write for an intelligent audience, an audience that's going to basically, if I try any gimmicks, they're going to know that it's a gimmick, and they're going to call me on the gimmicks. They don't want to play games. They want something intelligent and new. And so I try and keep that in mind. And even though I'm writing a YA fantasy series now, which is in that genre, there are certain expectations and rules to follow. I try and challenge those a little bit. I try and challenge them, not completely break them, because I don't want to put anybody off, but I do want to challenge and stretch them, and again, try and find some of those surprises. So when I'm writing for my audience, I think about that. What do they like to be surprised by, and what's going to surprise them? We've got a question here from Lori Rolleveld. She says, Al, do you think differently about audience when you're writing nonfiction than you do with fiction? And we can say the same thing with Angie, right? Angie, you can handle this question, I think, as well.
Yeah, well, in a way, because most of my stuff, of course, is written for the Christian market. So my latest book, 30 Events That Shaped the Church, and before that, 60 People. But in other nonfiction, 40 Days has to do with the 12 resurrection appearances of Christ. But in all of those, I work very hard not to write for academia. And when I pitch the idea, I make sure the editors know that I'm not writing a textbook. I'm not writing for people with PhDs and THDs and all the other stuff after their name. I'm writing for the average Joe and the average Sue. I write for the person in the pew. That's my target audience. It's not to say I couldn't write for the academic side, but that just doesn't capture my attention. I want the person in the pew to get something. So I usually think of people who have been in my churches. I don't think of individuals, but I just think of the kinds of people that have been in the churches. So I don't know that I think differently, but of course the topic is different. And so what I writing nonfiction, I'm thinking, I need to have an anecdote here. I need to make sure that the language is non-academic. It starts to say simpler, and that implies dumber, and I don't want that. But that it flows in a manner that will match what else they're used to reading. And so in that sense, yes, and how do you make a difficult topic clear and then memorable? So it's a little different in fiction. I'm focusing on how do I keep their interest, how do I move them along, and how do I get them to think. In nonfiction, I also want them to think, but the technique is different. What about you, Angie? Do you find it different when you're doing any kind of nonfiction writing?
I find it, well, speaking of dissertations, as you said, I am all finished with my THD except for my dissertation, and it's driving me crazy because I want to write a book. They tell me that a dissertation is supposed to be published, and I'm like, okay, then I want to write a book that people will enjoy reading and will learn something from. But they gave me this formula. I'm supposed to say how I'm going to research, what I'm going to research, how I'm going to conduct my notes, what everybody else has done, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but where do I tell them what I've learned? Anyway, it's driving me crazy because they want it to be academic, and I just want to write words that communicate, So anyway, but yes, absolutely. It's so different. Nonfiction, you write to impart information, so you have to make sure it's palatable, that they're going to understand it, that's not going to be a difficult read. And here again, we're not saying we're dumbing it down, we're just saying that you could absorb the information painlessly as opposed to something that's academic. And fiction is all about emotion. It's evoking emotions in the reader so that they live a vicarious life through the protagonist and the other characters. So one is totally experiential and the other one is totally intellectual. So, it kind of gives both sides of your brain a workout. But I enjoy both of them.
I've got to jump in on this here, Aaron. For my master's degree, I took an academic master's, and what that means is I had to write a thesis. And for those who may not be aware, thesis is what you write for your master's. A dissertation is what you write for doctoral level stuff, PhD, PhD, sort of thing. And so I ended up writing this 80-page piece of work that nobody in their right mind wanted to read. No, it was a quantitative analysis of Southern Baptist growth trends in San Diego County, and I forget the years, 81 to 91 or something like that. And I remember my major professor came up and said, "Man, that was great. I stayed up all night reading it," and I thought, this guy has less of a life than I do. But anyway,
wow.
The point of that whole story was when I tried my first nonfiction book, I had to throw out the first 3 chapters. I wrote it, and I got to about the end of the 3rd chapter, and I thought, I'm writing a big term paper. And so I had to start over. I had to toss them out and say, all right, now I've got to forget that. I'm not writing for professors. I'm writing for people in the real world.
Who are busy. And, people don't have time to sit down with a thesaurus. They just want information that flows to them. Right.
Pops, I've been waiting for decades for the sequel to your quantitative analysis of growth trends.
It'll be everybody's waiting.
Breathlessly. Let's get on that. It's funny you guys mentioned that. When I did my I don't think they called it a thesis, but when I did essentially my thesis for my master's program, I ended up with what was First in Fiction. It became my book, First in Fiction, and when I later talked with Eddie Jones from Lighthouse Publishing in the Carolinas about publishing it, I had to change it. I had to kind of narrow it down, and it was very academic, and I wrote it with the intention of impressing. My wife has just shown up, and she has lots of bags of rustling in the background if you hear that. Hello, dear. Hi, she's so beautiful and wonderful. But I really had to change the language because I wrote it originally to impress my professors, and people don't buy books that want to impress professors. They tend to buy books that they can read themselves. And so when I shifted the audience from impressing my professors to the beginning writer, it changed the entire tone of the book, and I think the book is much more manageable and easy to read. And I justify that in the sense that if you ever read Stephen King's on writing, he doesn't write to impress professors, namely because he doesn't have to. And if it's good enough for Stephen King to use a very colloquial kind of a voice and write for people to not only learn information but enjoy themselves while doing it, then by all means. So that's a good example of understanding your audience, or how the audience has changed the work itself. Quotidian Light has a question here, and I think this comes from something you said, Pops. It says, she asks, what do you mean by take advantage of the audience? She says she's heard it before and she's not sure what it means. Is that something you said, Pops?
I don't know. I'm old. I may have forgotten what I said. I don't recall saying taking advantage of the audience.
Maybe I may have said it. I think the idea here is maybe taking advantage of your knowledge of the audience, or I guess you can take advantage of the audience in a bad way, in the sense that you know their expectations and you kind of use that against them. But I don't think that's really the goal of writing. The goal of writing is not to take advantage of your audience, but to
what it might be is that some people write to template. They go, this is what medical suspense has in it, so I have to hit these 10 things. And here I have a protagonist, and the protagonist is now 80 pages in, so something has to happen to him or to her. There has to be some danger. And the problem with that is you can end up with some weak plot points in doing that. And I'm thinking of a medical suspense novel I read some time ago, very famous author. Made a lot of money writing these things, but as he got later and later in his books, he began to write into formula, and he would have his characters, and these are doctors, these are surgeons, doing very silly kinds of things, like scaling up a drain pipe to the 3rd floor of an apartment building to crawl into a murderer's apartment, knowing he's going to return in just a matter of moments and has no escape, but he's got to try it anyway. These people are highly educated, and so it was just unlikely, and pretty soon what you end up doing is, or the reader ends up doing, is saying, he's hiding behind the door, look there. So some people just writing to format like that, and they think that's because that's what my audience likes, and it worked in this book, and therefore I'm going to keep doing it until it's broken, until it stops working, is really bad form, and it'll come back to bite you.
I have something that might be interesting since we're talking about audience. A few years ago, I sent out a poll to my newsletter readers and set up a poll on SurveyMonkey. I think it's SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, SurveyMonkey or something like that.
And I just asked. Here's the. Hello, are y'all still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you hear me?
Okay, oops, I just got a little round circle. Anyway, I asked, see, look, here's all the results. But I asked, how many Angela Hunt books have you read? Do you prefer historicals or contemporaries? And then I said, this was most telling. What aspect of an Angela Hunt novel do you most enjoy? And it was, I enjoy her expecting the unexpected, the fact that I have unexpected things, 59%. So that was really, I thought, yes, I'm doing the right things because that is what my readers are noticing. And then they left comments, pages and pages and pages and pages of comments, which really helped me see what buttons I was pushing and sort of what my readers had in common. So it really helped me focus on who my ideal reader is, despite the fact that I've written so many different genres.
That is a fantastic idea to survey your readership. I like that idea. Lori has a question here. I think that's great. It may have to be our last question because of time, but she says, "Can you give a sample of what one of you might write in the target audience section of a book proposal?" So, you guys have written more book proposals than have I. So I'll defer to you guys on this. I know what I write. But you guys have written for so many different genres. I think how you change that from book to book, project to project might be kind of interesting for our listeners.
You want to go first, Angie?
Oh, sure. Well, one thing I usually try to do is identify another writer in that market who we would share the same readers. And for me, I would probably say Francine Rivers. I would probably say I believe readers of Francine Rivers would enjoy this book. And then another thing I've always done is I always say I write for women who are mostly college educated, probably 30 to 65 years old, who have children, and blah, blah. It depends on what the story was about. If it was a story with children in it, I would emphasize that. If it was a story of a career woman, I would emphasize that. It's just a matter of figuring out exactly who you think will pick up this book and then describing it in so many words.
I would go along with that. The book will dictate some of it, but I always mention that it's for adults, so they don't confuse it with a YA book. They get that right off the bat. And then sometimes I will link it to other writers, such as, or in the same vein as, and so that way the editor will get an idea. In the movie business, this is a type of pitching that they do. It's I've just lost the term for it. It's the big picture, the big idea, where you pitch an idea very quickly.
High concept.
High concept. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt.
You're welcome.
For correcting me online in front of all these people. The high concept of Bambi faces Godzilla, Bambi wins. Okay, so you kind of get an idea, or they will mix this movie with this twist. So sometimes I'll get that. It's kind of like this, it's kind of like that, but it differs in this way, so that they'll have an idea that we're not copying these other writers, but they'll give them a flavor anyway of what we're thinking about the project.
That's how I handle it too, as well. Usually, as the either the gender and age range of a readership, or also readers of a particular series. That maybe not necessarily just particular author, but maybe various authors in various different series. So that's, I think, the more research you do there, the better off you're going to be, because the publisher is going to feel confident that you've done your research and that there is an audience out there for it. So those are all good tips indeed. So any last bits of advice here before we sign off?
No, I think that's it for me. I don't know if the other people saw this, but Angie was almost eaten alive by her dog there.
He came in for a kiss. Well, I have one little bit of advice, just sort of as a follow-up of what we were just talking about. I was once at a conference reviewing manuscripts, and someone had apparently heard that thing about, compare yourself to another writer. And it was something, she wrote something like this: my story is just like Karen Kingsbury's book title here, except that mine is set in Peoria and hers was set in Los Angeles, and my protagonist's name is Marilyn, and her protagonist's name was blank. And no, they don't want a book report. They just want to know whose readers will identify with your book. And that's all it is. It's not a blow-by-blow comparison of your book with anybody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen King says that he writes for just one reader, and that's his wife. So the books he writes is basically to impress his wife still. So that's nice. But he has an ideal reader in mind. I think the term he uses, ideal reader, and that's your audience that you're writing for. So excellent stuff. Again, apologies up and down for the difficulties. Thanks, guys, for sticking with us throughout all of that. Real quick, let's remind our listeners how they can get in touch with us. We'll start with you, Angie. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to talk more with you?
There's a contact link on my website, which is angelahuntbooks.com. That would do it.
Excellent. And you, Pops?
Well, it's altonyansky.com, and that bridges to my writers' conference. It's coming up in May. It bridges to the podcast that I do. And I'll put this plug in. I had the pleasure just recently of interviewing Angie on Writers Talk, and you'll be able to find that at the website also. or see it at youtube.com/AltonGansky. It's another place you can see it.
Excellent. And you guys can always find me on Facebook or on Twitter, and AaronGansky.com as well, where you can find a link to my short story drive. Some more shameless self-promotion there. I think it's a gem, though. And if you do read it, let me know. Let me know what you think. I'd appreciate a comment either on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. That'd be great. So, Angie, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate your insights and your knowledge. And good luck on your dissertation.
If I ever get it done. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you all for listening. And until next week, good writing.